Under the cover of a moonless, storm-laden night, 3 shadowy figures moved swiftly, their boots splashing through the thick mud as they pursued a lone woman, her lab coat glowing faintly under the dim streetlights. Raindrops pounded the ground in a relentless torrent, drenching her white coat and plastering her hair to her face. Each step grew heavier, her movements sluggish from exhaustion, the soaked fabric clinging to her skin like lead. In her arms, she cradled a small black box, as though her very life depended on it. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, but she refused to stop. The night crackled with tension, every heartbeat louder than the next. "Adriana, stop," one of the men shouted over the rain, his voice barely audible over the storm's fury. "Don't make us shoot." But Adriana didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She knew what was at stake, and it was far more than her own life. Her eyes darted toward the distant outline of the forest ahead, so close yet impossibly far, if she could just reach it. Suddenly, her foot caught on an unseen root, and she tumbled to the ground, the box slipping from her grasp for a split second before her fingers reflexively tightened around it. Panic shot through her. She scrambled to get back on her feet, but it was too late. The sound of a single gunshot echoed. Her body jerked violently, pain exploding through her chest as the bullet tore through her. A gasp escaped her lips, followed by the faintest whisper of air, and she collapsed onto the wet earth. Blood mingled with the rain, seeping through her coat, staining the white fabric deep crimson. Even as the light faded from her eyes, Adriana's hands remained clenched around the black box, her final act one of defiance. The secret she had fought so hard to protect was still in her grasp. 500 meters away, atop an abandoned building, a lone sniper pulled her eye away from the rifle's scope. A faint smirk curled at the corner of her lips. She watched as Adriana's body lay still in the rain. Bloodline of betrayal. The full story. As Diana strolled slowly down the road, the soft hum of the late afternoon blending with the sounds of the city, her hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly. She caressed it gently, her touch filled with both wonder and disbelief. After 24 long years of waiting, of silent prayers and sleepless nights filled with worrying, she had finally conceived. Not just one child, twin babies growing inside her, a miracle she had scarcely dared to dream of. For decades, whispers had followed her, and the weight of expectations bore down on her shoulders. Her in-laws had grown impatient. Even her husband, though kind, had struggled with the quiet disappointment of an empty home. Diana had felt that pressure, deeply. And then, when she had all but given up hope, life surprised her in the most extraordinary way. Now, as she walked, the late stages of pregnancy had taken their toll on her weary body. Every step felt heavier than the last. The world around her blurred slightly as fatigue set in, her back aching from the weight she carried. Ahead, she spotted a small wooden bench in front of a cozy, old-fashioned restaurant, its soft lights offering a brief respite from her journey. With a sigh of relief, Diana made her way over and carefully lowered herself onto the bench, cradling her stomach as she sat. The bench creaked beneath her, but she paid no mind. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, just wanting a short break before heading home. Then, without warning, she felt an excruciating tearing sensation deep within her abdomen. Panic surged through her as sharp, stabbing pain radiated through her body, leaving her breathless. Diana's heart raced, her eyes widening in fear. Something was terribly wrong. Her hands flew to her belly as the pain intensified. "Help! Help me!" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. The words tore from her throat as she struggled to stay conscious, collapsing back onto the bench, her body racked with agony. Inside the restaurant, Mr. Samuel, the owner, heard her cries. He rushed outside, immediately spotting Diana slumped on the seat, her face pale, her hand clutching her belly, Without hesitation, he dashed to her side. "Ma'am, stay with me," he urged, his voice firm but calm. He knew time was critical. Diana gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks as the pain overwhelmed her. He didn't waste a second. Scooping her into his arms, Mr. Samuel carefully but quickly carried her to his car parked nearby. The rain that had started to drizzle did nothing to slow him down as he gently laid her in the passenger seat, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Hold on, we're getting you to the hospital," he assured her, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he sped through the streets. The tires screeched as they made sharp turns, the hospital looming in the distance. Diana could only groan in response, her body trembling as she held on to the faint hope that her babies would be okay. By the time they arrived at the emergency room, nurses and doctors were already rushing out with a gurney. And Mr. Samuel watched as they wheeled Diana inside, her cries fading into the sterile halls of the hospital. In his office, Pella sat at his desk, staring out of the window as a gentle breeze rustled the trees outside. His mind drifted to thoughts of his wife, Diana. For 24 years, they had prayed, hoped, and trusted in God for a child. Their marriage had been filled with love, but there was always an unspoken weight hanging between them, the hope for a family. The pressure from society, family, and friends had been relentless at times, but Pella had never lost faith. He believed that one day, their prayers would be answered. And then, as if in response to their years of patience and faith, Diana had gotten pregnant. Not just with one child, but twins. Pella could still hardly believe it. It felt like a miracle, a long-awaited gift that he cherished with every fibre of his being. The thought of becoming a father after so many years filled him with both excitement and disbelief. He was already imagining their future, picturing himself holding his children, guiding them through life. As he was lost in his daydreams, his mobile phone rang, breaking through his reverie. He blinked a few times, clearing his thoughts, and picked up the phone. "Hello," he asked, his voice laced with curiosity. "Hello. Is this Mr. Pella?" A calm female voice responded. "Yes, I am Pella. How can I help you?" he replied, sitting up straighter, sensing something important. "This is Dr. Mercy, a gynecologist from Grace and Mercy Hospital. I'm calling to inform you that your wife, Diana, just gave birth to twin girls." Pella's brain went blank for a moment as he processed the information. His heart seemed to stop, then race in his chest as the words echoed in his mind. "I'm now a father." The phrase kept repeating in his head, and before he knew it, he was whispering it aloud. I'm a father," he said in a breathless murmur, barely able to believe it. "Mr. Pella, are you still there?" Dr. Mercy's voice cut through his daze, bringing him back to the present. Yes, I'm here," he said, snapping back to attention. "I'll be there right away. Thank you, doctor. I'm on my way." Without a second thought, Pella jumped up from his chair and burst out of his office. His secretary, Rhoda, looked up in surprise as he hurried over to her desk. "Rhoda, cancel all my appointments for today," he said quickly. "Something urgent has come up. I have to leave now." Before she could respond, Pella was already halfway out the door. His heart pounded with excitement as he rushed to his car. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he fumbled with his keys, his hands trembling with a mixture of joy and nervousness. He finally started the engine and sped toward the hospital, his mind racing with thoughts of his wife and their newborn children. When he arrived at the hospital, Pella barely took a moment to park the car properly. He rushed inside, his legs moving faster than they ever had before. Reaching the receptionist's desk, he asked breathlessly, "What room is the pregnant woman who was just brought in?" The receptionist, a young woman with a calm demeanor, looked up slowly from her computer and asked, "Name?" "Her name is Diana Pella," he replied, his voice filled with urgency. The receptionist scanned her records for a moment before replying, "Room 48." Without waiting for further directions, Pella bolted down the hall, his footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. He reached room 48 and pushed the door open, without hesitation, his heart hammering in his chest. There, standing by the bed, was Dr. Mercy, and on the bed lay Diana, her face pale, but glowing with a soft, tired smile. Pella rushed to her side, sitting by the bed and gently taking her hand. "Honey, how are you? Where are our children?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Diana looked at him with tired but joyful eyes. "They've gone to be bathed and checked for infections," she said softly, her voice weak but filled with happiness. At that moment, a nurse entered the room carrying two tiny bundles, wrapped in soft pink blankets. She carefully handed the babies to Diana, who smiled as she cradled them in her arms. Pella leaned in close, his eyes wide with awe as he gazed down at his daughters for the first time. "They're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Look at them, Diana, they're perfect." Tears filled his eyes as he gently stroked the tiny fingers of one of the babies. He could hardly believe that after all these years, he was finally holding his children in his arms. The joy he felt was overwhelming. "Let's name them Adriana and Antonia," Diana suggested, her voice warm with love. Pella smiled through his tears, nodding. "Yes, let's do that. It's perfect." The next 3 days passed in a blur of joy and relief as Diana recovered in the hospital. Pella visited every day, spending as much time as he could with his new family, marveling at his daughters and doting on his wife. When Diana was finally discharged, Pella organized a grand naming ceremony to celebrate the arrival of their twin girls. The day of the ceremony was filled with laughter, music, and celebration. Family and friends gathered from far and wide to witness the occasion. Red and blue decorations adorned their home, and tables were piled high with food and drink. Pella stood proudly, his heart full as he introduced Adriana and Antonia to the world, giving thanks for the gift of life and family. As the festivities wound down and the last of the guests left, Pella, Diana, and their twin girls finally had a quiet moment together. The house, now filled with warmth and love, was everything Pella had ever dreamed of. Pella felt overwhelming joy as he smiled. As the years passed, the differences between the twins, Adriana and Antonia, became more pronounced. Adriana was undeniably beautiful, her delicate features and graceful demeanor drawing admiration from all who met her. Antonia, on the other hand, had a more rugged appearance. As she grew older, it became evident that her beauty wasn't conventional. She had sharp features, and her boyish style made her stand out in a different way. Where Adriana spent hours reading, cultivating her intellect, and honing her gifts, Antonia embraced physical activities. She loved sports, action movies, and anything that got her adrenaline pumping. When Adriana was 5, Diana walked into her room unexpectedly and found her daughter sitting on her bed with an open book, talking to it. What shocked Diana more was that the book seemed to be talking back, flipping its pages as though it were responding to Adriana's questions. "Adriana, what are you doing?" Diana asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Adriana looked up calmly, unbothered by her mother's reaction. "Mom, I can talk to books. They speak to me, and I can process any information they give me really quickly." Diana's heart skipped a beat as she nodded slowly, her mind already racing with the implications of what she had just witnessed. She left the room in a daze, whispering to herself, "This means my children have special abilities." From that day on, Diana began to watch both of her daughters closely, hoping to see if Antonia also had some extraordinary talent. But as the years passed, it became clear that Antonia didn't exhibit any supernatural abilities. Worse, Antonia's interests seemed to diverge further from Adriana's. She developed a love for fighting, watching blood-thrilling action movies, and spending most of her time in the gym. Diana, though initially disappointed, slowly accepted that Antonia's gift might be something less obvious. Soon, Pella began noticing something else. Adriana was distancing herself from Antonia. The bond between the two girls had weakened, and it worried him. One day, when the twins were 8, Pella called the twins into the living room for a discussion. Diana sat nearby, quietly observing, her expression unreadable. "Adriana," Pella began, his voice soft but firm, "I've noticed that you've been distancing yourself from your sister. I know that you have a special gift, and I understand that it might make things feel different. But your sister, Antonia, is your blood. You're supposed to protect her, no matter what anyone says about you." Adriana rolled her eyes slightly before speaking up. "But, Dad, I have a special brain. I can talk to books. I can absorb information faster than anyone. And Antonia, she's purely ordinary. She doesn't have any abilities at all. She's not even as beautiful as me. Whenever we're together, people look at her like she's less than human, and honestly, it embarrasses me. I can't help it. I'd rather keep my distance from her outside." Diana, who had remained quiet until now, suddenly snapped. "Will you shut up, Adriana?" Her voice was sharp, filled with disappointment. "Your sister is special too. Just because people don't treat her like they treat you, doesn't mean you get to treat her like she's less than human." Adriana looked taken aback, her eyes widening slightly. Diana continued, her tone softer but firm. "I know it's hard to see your sister being treated badly, but don't be like the others. You are special, yes, but so is she, and you don't need the crowd. The crowd needs you. Don't follow the crowd." Pella nodded, adding, "Your mother's right. You're both unique in your own ways, and you'll both discover your strengths, but you must never abandon each other." Adriana took a deep breath, her eyes flicking between her parents and her sister. "Okay, Dad. Okay, Mom. I won't treat her harshly again." "Don't worry, Mom and Dad. I'll always protect my sister with my life," Antonia said. But as the days turned into weeks, things didn't improve. If anything, Adriana distanced herself even more from Antonia. Their relationship became strained, with Antonia increasingly feeling like a wallflower, both at home and in school. Teachers barely paid attention to her, often comparing her to Adriana, who excelled in academics. By the time the sisters entered middle school, it became clear that Antonia wasn't meant for traditional schooling. Her father even had to buy her entrance into middle school, something that deeply humiliated her. One day, during a particularly harsh school day, Antonia sat in class, trying to focus, but the sneering comments from some of her classmates made it impossible. After class, her math teacher, Mr. Lawson, pulled her aside. "Antonia, I want to talk to you," he began, his voice condescending. "You're not doing well in your studies. I've seen you daydreaming, not focusing. You're not like your sister, Adriana. You're going to need to try harder if you want to keep up." Antonia clenched her fists, fighting back tears of frustration. "I don't want to be like my sister," she muttered under her breath, her heart heavy with anger. "Well, you might not have a choice if you want to succeed," Mr. Lawson said dismissively before walking away. Antonia stormed out of the classroom, her frustration boiling over. She found herself at the gym, her sanctuary. The weights and punching bags were her only solace. As she lifted dumbbells and worked on her strength, her mind focused, the world around her fading away. Antonia's days at school were rough, a constant reminder that she didn't fit the mold set by her sister, Adriana. Her teachers compared her to Adriana's academic brilliance, and her classmates saw her as nothing more than the lesser twin. But what cut deeper than the teacher's judgment was the taunting from her peers. One day, as Antonia walked down the school hallway, a group of girls whispered loudly behind her back. "Look, it's the freak," one of the girls, Leah, sneered, flicking her perfect hair over her shoulder. "Is she even related to Adriana? How did they come from the same parents?" Another girl, Vanessa, chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "I heard her dad had to pay to get her into middle school. Guess brains don't run in the family after all." Antonia clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wasn't one to back down from a fight, but she knew if she lashed out, she'd only get into trouble again. She quickened her pace, trying to ignore their snickering, but they followed her down the hall, their taunts growing louder. "What's the matter, Antonia? Are you too dumb to respond?" Leah mocked. Finally, Antonia stopped and turned to face them, her eyes narrowing. "I don't need to prove anything to you," she said through gritted teeth. "You think because you're popular, that makes you better than me." Leah rolled her eyes. "Don't be so dumb, Antonia. We both know it's not just about popularity. You're weird, Antonia. You're not like Adriana. She's smart and beautiful, and you are just plain Jane." The words hit Antonia hard, but after huge effort, she managed not to let it show. She simply stared at Leah for a long moment before saying, "I don't need to be like Adriana, and I don't need to be liked by people like you." Before Leah could respond, Antonia turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the stares of the other students on her back, but she kept her head high. Later that day, during gym class, Antonia felt more at ease. The gym was her safe space, where she could block out the noise and focus on what she was good at, being strong. She excelled in physical activities, outshining her classmates in endurance and strength. But even here, the comparisons followed her. As the students gathered for a relay race, she overheard two boys whispering nearby. "Why does Antonia even bother with this? It's not like she's going to go anywhere with it," one of the boys, Jason, said, smirking. "Yeah, his friend, Eric, added. Her sister's probably off reading a whole library while she's busy pretending to be tough." Antonia had heard enough. She walked over to the boys, her eyes locked on Jason. "You think just because I'm not like Adriana, that means I'm not good at anything?" Jason snorted. "Relax, Antonia. It's just a joke. Besides, we all know you're only good at one thing, and that is fighting." A slow smile spread across Antonia's face, her confidence rising. "I'll tell you what, Jason, how about we race? If I win, you stop running your mouth about me. If you win, I'll never step foot in the gym again." Jason laughed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Deal, but don't cry when you lose." The other students gathered around, sensing the challenge. The gym teacher, Mrs. Carpenter, blew the whistle to start the race. The two sprinted down the track, but it quickly became clear that Antonia was in a league of her own. She flew past Jason, her powerful legs carrying her across the finish line, far ahead of him. The gym erupted in cheers as Antonia crossed the line, her victory undeniable. Jason stood at the starting line, winded and embarrassed. He couldn't even look her in the eye. "Fine," he muttered under his breath. "I'll keep quiet." Antonia nodded, not needing to rub it in. Good choice. Despite her small victories at the gym, Antonia's life outside of it didn't improve much. She was still treated as the other twin at school, and Adriana continued to distance herself. The one place she truly felt herself was at the gym, where she could train without the weight of comparisons. One afternoon, after a grueling session of lifting weights, Antonia found herself alone, catching her breath by the punching bags. That's when she met Danny, the military instructor. He had been observing her from a distance, impressed by her focus and strength. He approached her with a raised brow. "You've got some serious strength, kid," he said, his voice gruff. "Where'd you learn to fight like that?" Antonia glanced up, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Self-taught," she replied simply. Danny chuckled. "Not bad for someone your age. Ever thought about taking your skills to the next level?" Antonia looked at him with interest. "What do you mean?" "Well, I run a military training program. We look for people with raw talent, people who don't fit the typical mold, but have something special. You've got that, Antonia. You've got fight in you. How about we spar? Let's see what you're made of." Antonia's eyes lit up with the challenge. "You sure you can handle it?" Danny grinned. "Let's find out." The two squared off, and despite his experience, Antonia's sheer strength and agility caught Danny off guard. She moved with a speed and precision that left him struggling to keep up. Before long, she had him pinned on the ground, panting for breath. Danny laughed, wiping his face as he stood up. "Damn, girl. You've got more fight in you than most of the recruits I've seen." Antonia shrugged, trying to hide her satisfaction. "Told you." Danny nodded, clearly impressed. "You should meet my mentor, Mr. Morris. He could teach you things that would make you unstoppable." Intrigued, Antonia agreed. A few days later, Danny brought her to meet Mr. Morris, a seasoned military veteran who had seen it all. When Antonia walked into the gym, Morris sized her up with a critical eye. "So, you're the one who beat Danny," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Let's see if you can handle the real deal." They sparred for what felt like hours, and although Morris had the upper hand, he recognized something in Antonia that was rare. She had the raw, untamed potential of a fighter. When they finished, Morris sat down beside her, his expression serious. "You've got something special, Antonia. Something most people don't have. You don't need to be like anyone else. If you train with me, I'll help you become the best version of yourself, but you have to commit. No holding back." Antonia looked at him, her heart racing. For the first time, someone saw her for who she was, not Adriana's twin, not the lesser sister, but Antonia, strong and capable. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do this." Antonia's days had been growing darker, with her father's constant comparisons to Adriana weighing her down. The latest blow had come when she was called into his study for a private talk. Sitting across from him, Antonia braced herself for the usual barrage of disappointment. Pella's face was stern, his voice cold. "Antonia, what is wrong with you?" he began. "Your sister Adriana has just received admission to Howard International University, the foremost science institution in the world. Why don't you have any talent? Why can't you live up to your potential?" Antonia sat silently, biting her lip to keep her emotions in check. "I've had enough," Pella continued, his voice growing harsher. "I don't want to keep paying school fees for someone who can't even make it through grade 9. You've repeated it 4 times. 4. It's time to face facts. You're not cut out for school. I'm going to talk to my friend, Mr. Matthew, and he'll arrange a job for you as a waiter in his restaurant. I won't waste another cent on this nonsense. Now get out." Antonia's heart shattered. She could barely contain the tears burning in her eyes as she looked at her father. Her voice cracked as she responded, "Why do you keep comparing me to Adriana? I'm tired of it, Dad. My name is Antonia, not Adriana." Without waiting for his response, she fled the room, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Antonia found herself at the Marcy gym, the only place she ever felt understood. That day, though, her usual focus was gone. She went through the motions of her training with Mr. Morris, but the weight of her father's words hung over her like a dark cloud. After their session, Mr. Morris, ever observant, noticed her unusual silence. He approached her, concern etched on his face. "Antonia," he began, "what's going on? I know you've faced trouble with your classmates before, but it's never affected your training like this. What's wrong today?" At his words, Antonia couldn't hold it in any longer. Tears streamed down her face, and she whispered, "My dad called me trash today. He said he's making me drop out of school. He told me I'm a waste of money because Adriana got into Howard, and I'll never be as good as her. He's giving up on me." Mr. Morris stepped forward, his expression hardening, but not in anger. It was the look of a soldier facing a broken comrade, one in need of strength. "Antonia," he said sternly, "you are a soldier. And soldiers don't cry. Now, dry your tears and listen." Sniffing, Antonia wiped her face, looking up at him. "I have some news for you," Mr. Morris said, his tone softening but still firm. "You've been offered admission to Marvin Military Institution. You're to report on September 1st. Antonia's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? How? I thought only people with special abilities could enter. How did they accept me?" Mr. Morris smiled warmly. "Because you do have a special ability. You have a talent for battle, Antonia, and more than that, you have super speed. The Academy saw your potential. They wanted to surprise you with the offer, but I guess I just spoiled it. I submitted your training results, and they recognized your worth." Antonia was overwhelmed with joy. For the first time in a long while, she felt valued for who she was, not for who she wasn't. "Thank you, Mr. Morris," she exclaimed, her face lighting up with happiness. I can't believe this." "Believe it," Mr. Morris said with a nod. "You've earned it. Now go home and prepare. You've got a bright future ahead." Later that evening, Pella sat in the living room with Adriana, still basking in the glow of her acceptance to Howard. He was proud of Adriana. She was everything he had dreamed his children would be. They were discussing her upcoming studies when the doorbell rang. Pella rose from his seat and opened the door to find a mailman standing there. "Good day," the mailman greeted. "I'm looking for a young lady named Antonia." Pella frowned, confused. "I'm her father. What do you have for her?" The mailman shook his head. "Sorry, sir. I'm under strict instructions to deliver this mail to Antonia personally." At that moment, Antonia's voice came from behind the mailman. "I'm Antonia. What do you have for me?" The mailman handed her a large envelope, stamped with an official seal from Marvin Military Institution. "This is for you. Have a good day." As Antonia took the envelope, her hands trembled with excitement. She knew exactly what it was. She tore it open, her eyes scanning the letter quickly. Pella and Adriana watched her in confusion. "What is it, Antonia?" Pella asked, still not understanding. Antonia looked up from the letter, her voice strong and clear for the first time in what felt like forever. "I've been accepted into Marvin Military Institution. I'm going to be a soldier." There was a stunned silence in the room. Adriana blinked, disbelief clouding her face. "What? That can't be right. How could you get into Marvin? Only people with abilities get in. What ability could you possibly have?" Antonia's jaw clenched, but before she could respond, Pella spoke up, his voice dripping with skepticism. "This must be some kind of mistake. You, a soldier. Antonia, be serious. You've never shown any academic talent, let alone any military skills." Antonia's gaze hardened. "I don't need to be like Adriana to succeed, Dad. Mr. Morris submitted my training results. They saw my strength, my speed. I earned this. I'm not just your other daughter. I'm Antonia, and I'm not a failure." Adriana shook her head, refusing to believe it. "There's no way. I've always been the one with the gifts, with the intelligence. You're just Antonia." Antonia's heart ached at her sister's words, but she stood tall. Maybe you don't believe in me, Adriana, but Marvin does. And I'll prove to you, to Dad, and to everyone else that I'm more than what you think I am. Hella sat back in his chair. For once, she wasn't looking for his approval. She had her own path now, and nothing was going to stop her from walking it. As she walked away, the letter clutched tightly in her hand, Adriana stared after her, still in shock. For the first time in their lives, Antonia wasn't the shadow. She was stepping into the light, and Adriana wasn't sure how to handle it. 5 years after their respective graduations, the lives of Adriana and Antonia had diverged in ways no one had fully anticipated. Adriana, now a celebrated physicist, had been appointed head scientist in the Department of Physics at the National Research Facility of the Sciences. Her name was becoming synonymous with cutting-edge theories, most recently her groundbreaking work on warp travel, which promised to revolutionize the world of science. Antonia, on the other hand, had followed her passion for combat and discipline, becoming a core member of Team Strike Alpha, Marvin City's premier special forces unit. While Adriana's achievements were celebrated in the headlines, Antonia's contributions to the safety of her city and country remained hidden in the shadows, her life one of silent duty and unspoken sacrifice. Then, on March 18, 2084, everything changed. A terrorist group known as Olsico launched an audacious attack on the National Armory, stealing weapons of mass destruction. Their aim was clear: destabilize global peace. In response, the government deployed Team Strike Alpha, Marine Commandos, and Special Team Delta to hunt down the terrorists and neutralize the threat. Antonia, a key member of the strike force, knew this mission was unlike any other. But from the very start, something felt off. As soon as they landed near the enemy's suspected base, Team Strike Alpha was ambushed. Bullets tore through the air, and the team struggled to hold their position, pinned down by a relentless barrage of gunfire. Became obvious that their mission had been compromised. Someone had leaked their location. "Commander, we're getting shredded out here," Sergeant Ramirez shouted over the deafening sounds of battle, desperation in his voice. "We need a plan, now." Antonia, crouched behind cover, surveyed the chaotic scene. The team was in disarray. She knew if she didn't act fast, they'd all be wiped out. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the sniper rifle strapped to her back and scanned the tree line for a higher vantage. "I'm going up. Hold them off as long as you can," Antonia said through her comms, her voice calm despite the chaos. "What do you mean, going up, Shantonia? Where the hell are you going?" Ramirez yelled back, but Antonia was already moving. With the agility and precision that had earned her a reputation in the team, she scaled a nearby tree, positioning herself high above the battlefield. From her perch, she had a clear view of the enemy positions. She steadied her rifle, her breath slow and even as she took aim. Her first shot rang out, dropping one of the enemy snipers hidden in the brush. In quick succession, she fired again and again, picking off key targets. Each shot was precise, lethal. The tide of the battle began to shift. "Who's taking out those shooters?" one of the soldiers exclaimed in disbelief over the comms. "It's Antonia," Ramirez replied, now fully understanding her plan. "Keep pushing forward. She's got us covered." With Antonia's sniper fire providing critical support, Team Strike Alpha began to regroup. Under the cover of her shots, they moved with newfound purpose, advancing toward the enemy's stronghold. As the last of the terrorists holding the ambush were taken out, Antonia swung down from the tree, landing silently on the ground. "Sniper support. Huh, didn't know you had it in you," Ramirez said as she joined the team, a mix of admiration and relief in his voice. "Didn't think I was just muscle, did you?" Antonia smirked, adjusting her rifle as they pressed forward. They breached the enemy base with tactical precision, taking out the remaining terrorists and securing the stolen weapons. It was a hard-fought victory, but Team Strike Alpha had succeeded in their mission thanks in no small part to Antonia's timely intervention. Later that night, as the team debriefed back at headquarters, Antonia sat quietly, her mind elsewhere. While the media buzzed with news of Adriana's latest scientific breakthrough, heralding her as the future of physics, Antonia's role in saving thousands of lives would remain classified. She would never be publicly recognized for her actions today, and that was fine with her mostly. Ramirez approached her as the others filtered out of the room. "Antonia, you saved our skins today. I don't think we would have made it out without you." She looked up, meeting his gaze with her usual calm. "It's what I'm here for." "You're more than just a soldier, you know," Ramirez said, his voice lowering slightly. "You've got something special: leadership, intuition. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not important just because they don't see you in the spotlight." Antonia nodded, appreciating his words, but still feeling the weight of being overshadowed by her sister. "I'm not looking for the spotlight. That's Adriana's world." Ramirez studied her for a moment. "Maybe. But when it counts, you're the one who makes sure the world keeps spinning." As Antonia walked away from the debriefing, she replayed the events of the day in her mind. The success of the mission, the close calls, the relief of victory. But one thought lingered, something that had been nagging her since they first walked into the ambush. Who leaked the mission? Back at home, Pella and Adriana were watching a news report about the attack, the anchors discussing the military's successful operation. Adriana, sitting smugly, commented, "Another mess averted by the military. But it's the brains that truly save the world." Just as Adriana was about to continue, the doorbell rang. Pella opened the door to a mailman. "Good day. I'm looking for a lady named Antonia." Pella frowned. "I'm her father. What's this about?" "I'm under strict orders to deliver this package to her personally," the mailman replied. Before Pella could respond, Antonia walked in from behind. "I'm Antonia." The mailman handed her the package with a formal salute. "Congratulations, ma'am," he said before departing. Adriana looked on curiously as Antonia tore open the package. Inside was a sleek black folder with the official seal of Marvin City's military. Adriana's eyes widened as she watched Antonia pull out a letter. "What's this?" Adriana asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Antonia skimmed the letter, her lips curling into a smile. "I've been promoted, commander of Team Strike Alpha." Adriana blinked, stunned. "Wait, what? You're leading them now?" Antonia looked at her sister, her gaze steady. "Yeah, I am." For the first time, Adriana was speechless. Antonia sat in her dimly lit quarters, the hum of the base faint in the background. She had been restless for days. Ever since the nearly failed operation, Team Strike Alpha had walked into an ambush. Someone had leaked their mission details, and she knew there was a mole within the ranks. The nagging suspicion gnawed at her every waking thought. As she leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowed with a steely resolve. She would find the traitor, no matter what. Her investigation began quietly, collecting snippets of conversations, reviewing mission logs, and cross-referencing communication channels. Antonia wasn't just a soldier. She was a hunter, methodical and patient. She had earned her place in Team Strike Alpha through skill and tenacity, and she would prove that now more than ever. The deeper she dug, the more unsettling the pieces became. Inconsistent logs, encrypted messages that didn't align with standard protocols, and, most concerning of all, strange gaps in the security footage from recent briefings. It was as though someone had expertly covered their tracks, but not enough to elude her trained eye. Each clue pulled her toward a grim realization, one she fought to dismiss at first, but the evidence became undeniable. Her sister, Adriana, had access to classified information. She had always been brilliant, far more intelligent than most could comprehend, and her position at the National Research Facility of the Sciences had granted her access to sensitive military data. Adriana had been working on warp technology, a theory that could alter the balance of global power. If such technology fell into the wrong hands, the consequences would be catastrophic. Antonia's heart sank. She didn't want to believe it. How could Adriana, her own sister, be involved? But the encrypted messages she decoded led back to Adriana's terminal. It became clear that Adriana had been communicating with a shadowy organization, exchanging information for reasons Antonia couldn't yet understand. Perhaps it was greed, perhaps a misguided belief that her discoveries would bring about some utopian future. It didn't matter. She had to stop her. On the night of the final operation, Antonia received a mission briefing. Intel had come in. Adriana had stolen a vital piece of technology and was on the run. The black box in her possession contained the key to unlocking warp travel. If she succeeded in delivering it to her buyers, the world could be plunged into a new era of warfare, one where no one was safe. Antonia's orders were clear: eliminate the target and retrieve the box. But the target was her sister. As the rain poured down that night, Antonia perched atop a rooftop, her sniper rifle poised, the crosshairs trained on Adriana. Below, she could see her sister running, the black box clutched tightly in her arms. Adriana had always been faster, always one step ahead, but not tonight. "Adriana, stop," one of the operatives shouted. But Antonia knew her sister wouldn't. Adriana had always been defiant, always determined to complete whatever mission she believed in, no matter the cost. Antonia watched through the scope as Adriana stumbled, falling to the ground. Her heart pounded, her finger resting on the trigger. She had taken countless lives before, but none of them had ever been family. She felt the weight of the rifle, the cold metal against her skin, and for a moment, her resolve wavered. But then she remembered the destruction Adriana could unleash. "This is bigger than family." The gunshot rang out, echoing across the rain-soaked street. Antonia's breath caught as she watched the bullet find its mark. Adriana's body convulsed, the life draining from her as she collapsed into the mud. Blood mixed with the rain, seeping into the earth beneath her. Even in death, Adriana's hands were locked around the black box, her final act of defiance. Antonia slowly pulled her eye away from the scope, rain dripping from her face. Indistinguishable from the tears, she refused to acknowledge. The smirk on her lips wasn't one of satisfaction, but of bitter irony. She had completed the mission. She had killed the one person she had sworn to protect. With deliberate slowness, Antonia descended from the rooftop. Each step felt heavier than the last, the rain pounding against her as if trying to wash away the weight of what she had done. She approached Adriana's lifeless body, kneeling beside her, and for a long moment she simply stared. Her sister, once so vibrant, so full of life, now lay cold and still before her. Antonia reached out, gently prying the black box from Adriana's hands. It was small, unassuming, yet it held the power to change the world. She stood, clutching the box, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: grief, guilt, anger, and above all, a hollow sense of duty. Her earpiece crackled to life. "Alpha One, confirm target elimination," the voice demanded, cold and professional. Antonia didn't respond immediately. She stared down at the box, at the ruined life before her. "Target eliminated," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Proceed with extraction," the voice ordered. Antonia removed the earpiece and tossed it into the mud. She wouldn't need it anymore. There was nothing left for her to hear. She had completed her mission, but at what cost? She glanced one last time at her sister, then turned away, walking into the storm with the black box in hand. In the end, blood and duty had collided, leaving only sorrow in their wake. The two sisters, though rivals, had been torn apart by their choices. And now, only one remained, burdened with the weight of a world saved and a sister lost.